Good evening. Thank you all for coming out tonight, and welcome to this special meeting of the Westminster Mayor and Common Council. We'll begin the meeting as we do all of our meetings with the pledge of the flag, followed by a moment of silence. I don't know where the flag is, but we'll assume that there's one somewhere nearby. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. Let me encourage everybody who has a cell phone or some other electronic device with them this evening to please silence it now so as not to disrupt the meeting. We appreciate you doing that. We just want to thank you all for joining us in the latest of our series of meetings that we've held ever since 2002 on Westminster's water and sewer situation. It's been our goal all throughout that time to keep the public and particularly the development community, who we want to make sure understands our situation, apprised of our situation, of the work that the city's doing to move us forward, and you know, the plans that we have. Let me just say at the outset, we've done a lot of good work over those years, working closely with our partners at the Maryland Department of the Environment, with the county, with other officials and agencies to try and keep this on track, and we're looking forward to sharing some information with you this evening. I'm joined here by my colleagues on the council, Mr. Mayor, and you know, the others will have a chance at the end of the presentation. If anybody would like to ask any questions, and we'll also have the opportunity to share any comments we might have at that point. This time, I'd like to turn things over to our city administrator, Ms. Barb Matthews, to begin the presentation.
Thank you, President Pecoraro. Tonight, I'll be providing information on the city's current water and sewer allocation policy and the context surrounding that policy. Together with Mr. Glass, our Director of Public Works, we'll be sharing information on current city initiatives that are underway to ensure water and sewer capacity for future generations, which, as the Mayor and Common Council know, is one of the primary focus areas included in the city's adopted strategic plan. To kind of kick things off, I'd like to provide some background information on events that have shaped the city's current water and sewer allocation process. And that goes back to 2002. As some of you may recall, there was a severe drought in this area during 2002, and due to the severity of that drought, the city at that time enacted mandatory water restrictions, resorted to trucking in water to serve our existing users. We restricted the issuance of new building permits and the approval of subdivision plats, and also during the 2002 drought, the city violated a condition of one of its water appropriation permits that required the city to cease withdrawals at certain locations when stream flows fell below minimum levels. The events that transpired during the drought of 2002 culminated in the execution of a consent order between the city and the Maryland Department of the Environment in 2007. That consent order was structured in a manner that allowed the city to meet its existing water needs while it developed and implemented certain remedial measures. That consent order was also structured to allow the city to undertake certain limited interim growth and establish a system for managing the city's future water capacity in accordance with the Maryland Department of Environment guidelines. That order was modified in 2008 to recognize certain actions that had been taken by the city, and certain terms and conditions were modified. That consent order remains in effect today and has implications for how the city allocates water. I think one of the most important things that I hope everyone gets out of tonight's presentation is to understand that there are two parallel processes for the allocation of water within Westminster's service territory. And for those who don't know, our service territory includes properties both within the corporate boundaries of Westminster as well as areas outside the city limits. One allocation process is managed by the City of Westminster. The other allocation process for water is managed by the Carroll County Health Department, which acts as the review agent for the Maryland Department of the Environment. Each of these processes has its own cap or limitation. I'd like to maybe start off with talking a little bit about the allocation process that falls under the umbrella of the Maryland Department of the Environment. The focus of that allocation process is the total amount of available city water. And I want to stress the total amount of allocatable water because that is different than how the city's allocation process works. As I mentioned, the Carroll County Health Department acts as the local agent for the Maryland Department of the Environment. The Carroll County Health Department maintains its own tracking system for the allocation of Westminster's water. The Health Department deducts the amount of water for a specific project within Westminster's water service area at either the plat or the permit stage, and once again, that deduction is made from the total amount of all available city water for allocation. Juxtaposed against that is how the city actually allocates water on its side. In March of 2018, the Mayor and Common Council adopted a new water and sewer allocation process. The adoption of that resolution followed a 9-month period, as many of you in the audience know, during which the city temporarily ceased the processing of applications that required a net new water allocation. That suspension was put in place by the Mayor and Common Council upon the recommendation of staff, because candidly, we were basically running short of allocatable water until a new water source came online. That suspension was necessary because we had a delay in bringing the Gazelle well online. As part of approving that project, the Maryland Department of the Environment asked the city to add certain filtration for safety and purity. The 2018 allocation policy, which has been refined 4 times since its initial adoption in March of 2018, was put in place after months of study and discussion by the mayor and the member of the Common Council's Economic Development Committee. In crafting the 2018 allocation policy, the mayor and the committee were concerned with providing necessary allocations for projects that were in process at the time of the application suspension. After those needs were met, the committee's goal was to focus on the remaining resources to make sure that we were spurring continued economic development in Westminster to increase our tax base. An integral part of the 2018 allocation policy is a master distribution chart, and I do have an example of that tonight with me if anyone would like to talk to me after the meeting. But essentially, it's a chart that basically outlines how the city's limited water resources are to be allocated, and it serves as an internal tracking mechanism for city staff. The planning horizon selected by the mayor and the members of the Economic Development Committee back in March of 2018 was 7 years. So we're now, about a year into that process, but that time horizon will go into 2024. As of March 26, 2018, which is when the new allocation policy was put into effect, the city at that time had 174,000 gallons of water per day to allocate. Once again, as I just mentioned, a focus of the mayor and common council was to ensure that projects that were already in process at the time of the suspension were able to move forward. So of that 174,000 gallons per day, 97,000 gallons roughly was allocated for projects that we were allowing to move forward. And the remaining 77,000 gallons per day was divided evenly over the 7-year time frame that was selected by the mayor and common council. So that roughly 11,000 gallons per day per year is really the hard stop on the city side. So we have essentially self-constrained the allocation of our water resources to make sure we didn't find ourselves in another application suspension period. Once again, the way the Maryland Department of the Environment looks at it is they look at the total amount of water, and the city could allocate that all at one time if we wanted to do so. So there are significant differences between the two tracking systems. Our allocation policy prioritizes projects within the city limits. It also prioritizes commercial and industrial projects, as I mentioned, with the goal of enhancing our tax base. And another focus of the new allocation policy was to promote multifamily residential projects. We had at that time about 600 single-family home applications that had been approved and were pending. And the thought of the mayor and common council was that we had a lack of diversity in our housing options, and we were trying to promote and incentivize folks to develop more workforce housing. Part of our ongoing process, both during the application suspension period as well as today, is to encourage applicants that we are working with to try to accommodate their projects within the existing water envelope. Our goal is to basically minimize the amount of water that is necessary for any single development project so that we have more water available for other applicants. Obviously, the way you can do that is by changing out water fixtures and things of that nature, and we have seen a positive response from applicants to meet that goal. As I mentioned in my opening remarks, one of the primary focus areas of the city's adopted strategic plan is ensuring water and sewer capacity for future generations. In support of that goal, the Mayor and Common Council's Public Works Committee are continually looking for new city water sources to ensure the city's continued growth and prosperity. I'd like to spend a few minutes talking about the new water sources that we're currently exploring, and those include the Gazelle Stream Rehabilitation Project, Medford Quarry, and the city's water reuse initiative. And at this time, I'm going to turn it over to our Director of Public Works, Mr. Glass, to talk about each of these three areas.
So with regard to the relocation of Little Pipe Creek, it was during the construction and development of the treatment process for the Gazelle well that it was determined the well was under the influence of surface water. And that required a revision of the treatment scheme. And in addition, at that time, MDE reduced our allocation to the 165,000 gallons per day that you've seen in earlier slides. And we were kind of stuck with that until the time that the stream bed could be relocated and that hydraulic connection with the groundwater be eliminated. MDE also advised that upon completion of that relocation, it would be acceptable if we would enter into an additional pump test to determine the potential for a new well yield, and that appropriation would be entertained. So at this point, the relocation work is complete, as is the first 30-day phase of this longer-term pumping test. And I'd be remiss if I didn't note the good work that was done and significant work from the county, specifically Tom Devilbiss and Zach Neal, as they have assisted us with MDE discussions and field monitoring efforts as well. Next on the list is Medford Quarry. And again, it's necessary to note that the same two guys, Zach and Tom, their significant work in the Medford Quarry project as well. So originally, and still today, there's an agreement between the city and the quarry owners with regard to the use of the quarry water, which is made available as a product of their dewatering efforts, and it's necessary for their mining operations. That water is appropriated to the city for emergency purposes only and is expressly forbidden for expansion as a new water source by the Maryland Department of Environment. Tom and Zach's efforts to investigate if additional water was available were successful and sufficient to prove that there is indeed enough water available for growth purposes, plus the emergency source as well. MDE then added some additional requirements, one of which requires a new agreement and the perpetual rights of that water to be assigned to the city. As a result, the new quarry owners have requested the city be responsible for some rather significant financial burdens, one of which will cover their operational costs related to energy and maintenance of their existing dewatering operations. Other requests include the liability of and/or the rehabilitation of their existing sedimentation pond dam, which is a structure that's regulated by Maryland Dam Safety. The city has been and remains in negotiation with the quarry owners, and the discussion is currently in their legal review as of a recent email. In an effort to determine a long-term drought-resistant solution to Westminster's water issues, a water reuse initiative has been forwarded for research and development. Water reuse has been widely utilized in the West and is certainly a viable option for the city. The process would utilize an already treated reclaimed water from our wastewater treatment plant and again treat it through state-of-the-art membrane and advanced oxidation processes. That water would then be transferred to our raw water reservoir for environmental buffer and acclimation to the existing natural waters. Currently, the city is in the approval process to operate a pilot system for testing and research purposes. Those results will be evaluated and a determination made for next steps once the pilot is complete, and that's expected to take 8 months or so. Theoretically, that future could always be utilized to keep a reservoir full at all times, as it would be a sustainable and completely drought-resistant supply.
The next section of the presentation will focus on the status of the city's available sewer capacity, which is not an issue that has been discussed as widely as our water limitations. I did want to note that Westminster's sewer allocations are handled in a different manner than our water allocations. Unlike water, the Maryland Department of the Environment does not track or monitor the city's sewer allocations. The Maryland Department of the Environment, however, does require the city to submit periodic wastewater capacity management plans The most recent plan was filed with the Maryland Department of the Environment in January of 2018. In those plans, a 3-year average of sewer flows is calculated, and that is the basis that is used to determine the sewer capacity that is available for allocation in Westminster's service territory. Just like our water allocations, sewer allocations are governed by resolution number 18-04, which once again was passed in March of 2018. Similar to water, the priorities are projects within the city limits, commercial and industrial projects to enhance our tax base, and multifamily residential projects. Kind of talk a little bit about where we are with our sewer capacity. As of March 26, 2018, and based on the wastewater capacity management plan I just mentioned, we had 300,000 gallons per day of sewer capacity that was available. As I noted, the Mayor and Common Council were committed to making sure that projects that were in process could move forward. So roughly 193,000 of that 300,000 gallons of sewer capacity was allocated for projects that were in process at that time. And then there was a remaining roughly 107,000 that was available for allocation. That amount was divided evenly over the 2018 to 2024 planning horizon set forth in the allocation policy to align with the water that was available for allocation as of March 2018. If you've been tracking the numbers, the one thing I wanted to note is we, at that time, had slightly more sewer capacity than we did water, allocatable water that was available. That difference, which as of now is just under 30,000 gallons per day, represents the amount of sewer capacity that is currently available for allocation as the city brings new water sources online. A couple sewer capacity considerations that I think are worth noting. Some of these may seem familiar to many of you in the audience. Our wastewater plant is in the process of being upgraded to ENR standards. That project duration is approximately 43 months. The project got underway in early 2019. And I did want to note that this project, even though it is incredibly expensive, will not increase the physical capacity of our wastewater treatment plant. There are a couple options that the city will be pursuing. One of those is the possible re-rating of the plant, and also we have on our capital improvement program a long-term goal of increasing the physical capacity of the plant to 6.5 million gallons a day. At this time, I'd like to turn it over to Mr. Glass to talk a little bit more about those two options.
So upon completion of the ENR project, as Ms. Matthews has earlier advised, the city anticipates a re-rating negotiation with MDE regarding the design flow of the system. Currently, we're at 5 million. Once that's complete, there will likely need to be a period of time to prove effluent results before that request can be made. The operational time that is assumed would be 1 year, which would include all 4 seasons, as there are times when this limits of technology treatment is tougher to achieve than others. So in all 4 seasons, we should be exposed to those difficulties. Beyond re-rating, the longer term would be the addition of more treatment capacity. The treatment plant's limited to a maximum of 6.5 million gallons per day to be discharged to Little Pipe Creek. And while we've anticipated that expansion in the current construction, which ultimately will reduce costs to a degree, there still will be significant financial investment, and that investment will include a 4th clarifier and conversion to an integrated fixed film activated sludge process. So we've kind of already started that process in that thought and engineering process in the construction of where we are right now, but which will help, but it's still going to be a very, very expensive process.
Thank you. Well, as Mr. Glass noted, we have some plans on the horizon, but the re-rating of the plant and actually increasing the physical capacity of the plant is some distance out in the future. For that reason, the Mayor and Common Council have placed a high priority on reducing extraneous flow to the city's wastewater treatment plant. That is also one of the focus areas of our strategic plan. For those who aren't familiar with the term inflow and infiltration, which is the term we use all the time, it refers to defects in piping that allow ground and surface waters to enter the sewer collection system, which consumes capacity both in the collection system and at the wastewater treatment plant. As part of our most recent wastewater capacity management plan, there was an estimate of inflow and infiltration into the city's sewer system, and that was estimated at 50%. In recent years, the Mayor and Common Council have made a considerable financial investment in mitigating I&I into the city's sewer system. At the suggestion of Mayor Dominic and with the full support of his colleagues on the Common Council, the city's fiscal year 2020 budget advanced funding from the out years of the city's capital improvement program to be able to put more dollars towards mitigating I&I. And at this time, I'd like to turn it over to Jeff to talk a little bit about our mitigation efforts.
So Westminster, like all water reclamation facilities, suffers from inflow and infiltration. And as Barb had mentioned, the Mayor and Common Council have recently made funds available to act on and either repair or replace these suspect areas of poor pipe conditions. These repairs have provided rather significant results to date and have decreased plant flows by upwards to 900,000 gallons per day. Now, it should be understood that I&I work is an ongoing process, and with that, there likely will never be a day when there's zero inflow or infiltration. However, it should also be understood that the efforts to reduce the I&I have, and I use the term I&I, inflow and infiltration, I apologize for that, that's just convention from the world that I live in. But so the efforts to reduce the I&I have compounding results. Other than just plant capacity, there's energy and chemical costs to decrease as well when these extraneous waters are removed from the treatment process. The successful reduction of I&I is the ultimate key to finding additional plant capacity, and it is the best dollar spent in that regard. Ms. Matthews mentioned the sewer capacity management plan and the 3-year running average that's used in the calculation of that capacity. Now, while we've not had that opportunity to challenge that convention, it would seem unfair to be penalized for such a long period if repairs were proven to be affected by decreased flows, etc. So a modification of that running average method would seem to be reasonable, but of course we don't know that yet. We have to be able to prove that, and we'll see when we get there.
I guess kind of in conclusion, hopefully what everyone will take away from our comments tonight is that the City of Westminster has both constraints and opportunities relative to our water and sewer capacity. The Mayor and Common Council have been working diligently throughout my 3 years with the city to address those constraints, and their commitment is formalized in both the city's adopted strategic plan as well as the financial investment they have made every year in the city's budget. And lastly, through thoughtful planning, the city has developed and put in place specific short-term, mid-term, and long-term strategies to address our water and sewer constraints. Mayor Dominic and Council President Pecoraro, that concludes staff's presentation, and Mr. Glass and I would be happy to respond to any questions you have or any questions that anyone in attendance tonight has.
Thank you very much, Ms. Matthews. Before we go any further, I just want to recognize that we're joined this evening by 2 of our county commissioners, Commissioners Boucher and Frazier. We're very pleased to have both of you here tonight with us. It's very important that the county understand what we're doing and how we're arriving at the decisions we're making. And we're very pleased you're here tonight and able to communicate some of this to your colleagues when you have the opportunity. Mr. Mayor, do you have any comments you'd like to make or add at this point?
I was going to comment on why the E&R upgrade isn't adding capacity, but I think you kind of touched on that already. If you think if anyone has any questions about that, we can go into more detail about why that's the case. But no, Mr. President.
Thank you. Anything from any of my colleagues before we open it up to public questions? All right, thank you. So in that case, what we'd like to do is, if anybody here who's joined us in the public would like to ask any questions or make any comments on what they've heard tonight, we certainly welcome them. We just want to caution everybody that we're not necessarily in a position to answer every question, and we're certainly not in a position to respond in real time to any suggestions or requests that you might make. But anything that anybody does suggest or request, we will certainly take under advisement, discuss with our staff, and address as quickly as we can. So that being said, if anybody would like to be heard, please step up to the microphone, give your name, an address for our city clerk, and we're glad to do our best to answer your questions. Anybody? All right. Well, thank you very much. We're very pleased that we've had this opportunity to share this information. Again, it is the commitment of the mayor and council to be as open and transparent as possible as we can on this issue. We recognize that it affects not only a great many residents of the city, but also a lot of businesses in the city and the plans that we all have for future development in the city. The city itself has some exciting plans for development coming up. As many of you know, we recently acquired control of the Stockstill property on Main Street. Between that and the city's acquisition of the former Carroll County Bank headquarters just down the block, we're looking forward to some exciting new redevelopment efforts downtown, which we think is going to spur a real change in our downtown and encourage others to do the same. We want to make sure that we have the water and sewer capacity to accommodate that kind of development, as well as the many other projects that have been mentioned or discussed in the past. So with that, we thank you all for coming. We wish you a happy holiday season, and the meeting's adjourned.